One of the great things about Battletech, and certainly mechs are king. Mechs in the narrative and in the game are of primary focus. But Battletech Total Warfare Combined Arms means you can expand out your miniature collection. You can expand out your battles to take advantage of tanks, infantry, artillery, air support, naval support. Have battles on the land, out in space, various tactica. Battletech can be as big or as focused as you want. And in this vlog, we're going to jump in with an overview focused at newer players because it can be a little bit intimidating where you're learning the rules. And certainly for the majority of the units across the Battletech universe, they utilize the same group of rules. But there's various nuances and various phases where things activate and behave a little bit differently. And it can be a little bit overwhelming. So certainly with the resources of YouTube and perhaps your Battletech group, you can jump in. But I wanted to push up and explore some of the differences, the core tactica, and the rules understandings of playing with air support and how that works into Battletech. And once we've laid that foundation down, we're going to jump into some of my favorite air units in the game to start expanding out the channel in that direction. I mean, this is a great time, right? The golden age of Battletech. The fact that you're feeling pretty good right now. You've got your miniature collection complete. You're looking to jump in with some new stuff. Let's add some air support to the game. So we essentially, tactically speaking, break down air support into three categories. The first is VTOLs, stuff like the Warrior, attack helicopters, units that traditionally speaking can change elevation, can land, can take off, and operate in that first segment of the game. And often these don't mount a ton of armor. They're very, very specialized. They tend to be more conventional in nature. And the battle value is very low or very, very reasonable. I mean, you can take a couple of Warriors, you can take some Karnovs at any battle level and add that Tactica. And certainly I've pushed those reviews and those Tactica up to the Battletech playlist here on my channel. But then we jump into the second group where now you have what I call conventional air support. These are current, modern, in the Battletech universe. A great example would be like the Mech Buster. These are made to operate within the atmosphere. And their battle value is somewhat reasonable also. If I had to draw an analogy, framing it to mechs, VTOLs would be light mechs. Air support would be medium mechs that are made to work in the atmosphere. And then we have Aerotech, the air support that is capable to operate both in space as part of dropships and that kind of process, but also can operate on the table as a conventional air unit. And when we explore these, given the duality of the role, even though you can exclusively play them as air support, they pack a lot of weapons, they have a lot of armor, they cost a high battle value. I mean, most of these are also fusion powered. I mean, they're kind of mechs with wings with how they utilize. So what gets interesting here, of course, is they're kind of the equivalent of heavy or even assault mechs. So jumping in from that perspective, the primary shift in the game when you include air units without house rules. Now, I know some groups will house rule things, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I like to approach it from raw, rules as written. So this idea that you can learn the core rules, have that portability to go to various gaming clubs or participate in the Battletech community. And of course, it's a war game. We're here to have fun. So at any time, you can modify the rules. But the two primary changes are going to be the phase of the game. When these units move, they move out of a traditional phase, much like the physical attack phase, and tracking and understanding elevation. And this idea of elevation, and it's a great capture of the narrative in Battletech, because as you fly and hover, you can change elevation, and that not only determines what you can potentially attack, but what can potentially attack you. Because it's not just counting hexes across, it's counting, in a way, hexes up. Elevation is also important because elevation determines not only attack modifiers, but you can very much real time crash into stuff. I mean, there have been examples in city fights, city tech, where, yeah, I can fly at a high enough level, but I'm going to be zapped by everything. If I can literally fly in those city streets, then that's pretty good. It protects me. But in that case, in protecting me, I really have to take account how fast these units can move, my ability to turn, my ability to increase or decrease speed, tracking that, and not get hit. But I'll tell you, when the stars align, it's a lot of fun. Speaking of a Karnov, as an example, just to fill in the narrative, they're very, very low battle value. And I usually use them to support my infantry, drop-off infantry. But there is a variant which mounts an autocannon 20. And if you've been following my vlogs, you know I love big guns. So here's the triplicity that I can't resist. We've got a unit I love, the Karnov. We've got low battle buy-in, and I've got an autocannon 20. There's no armor on that Karnov. It's only one shot. I mean, you know, it's essentially just a massive gun on that platform. So I proxied, well, not proxied because it's a variant. I took my Karnov and identified it to my opponent and said, hey, this is the autocannon 20 version. I'm flying in on the city. I get really, really low. Really low. I'm like elevation like 2. I'm up there at the height of the buildings. Nothing can shoot me, but I'm zipping down this city street. Infantry on either side trying to zap me. Doors open up. Autocannon 20 drops. In the target is a Jenner, a Wolverine, and a Marauder. I realize I've got one pass at this. I've got one pass, hit or miss, winner takes all. What do you do in that moment? Now, usually I go for the tabletop glory. If there's a chance for glory, I have to take it. So my natural thought was, go for the Marauder. I mean, if you get a headshot or if you get lucky, it was pretty much undamaged. But I'm like, you know, this could be. Battletech might reward me for my audacity. Might reward me with a headshot on this or you know, torso crit 1 and see what happens. So, or crit 2, snake eyes, right? But I'm like, you know what? Play smart because I'm only going to get one shot at this. And from that perspective, I'm going to go on the Jenner because it was a little bit slower. It didn't have the movement modifiers. It thought it was protected in the city streets. Drop down, take some fire, shrug it off. It's hard to hit when you're moving fast. Blast away. I hit. The damage transfer just blew that thing apart. Then, of course, when I pulled up, I ate a lot of firepower from other mechs and units in there, and the Karnov went down in a blaze of glory. But, boy, it was a lot of fun. But I say that because you can get yourself into trouble really, really fast. Now, tactically speaking, putting that aside for a moment, it does add a significant, so like pros and cons. Pros, more miniatures to buy. A lot of fun. Increase your tactics on the table. And we'll look at 2 important points in terms of rules updates with how they interact a little bit differently than conventional type units. The main thing, though, is it's another level of bookkeeping. You've got to calculate elevation. You've got to calculate speed. Often in the rules, depending on the size that you're playing, the air unit will cross the table or cross the hex maps, exit, and then come back on in another turn. So there's various rules to support that if you're not playing with a big enough table, with the idea being these units move very, very, very fast on the table. So are you willing to have that additional phase and that additional calculation? It does slow things down. But at the same time, it opens up some pretty interesting cool factor to explore. Now, the other advantage, or I should say, well, advantage, disadvantage, depending on where you are, if you don't have dedicated anti-air or dedicated air units yourself, it can be a little bit unfair, a little bit kind of not so fun to play against. Now, tactically, it's like, hey, if we agree to play a battle value game, how do we handle that? I like to agree ahead of time, just on a side note, we've got 8K battle value. I've got a lot of miniatures. what do you feel like playing? Like, are we just going to do mechs? Are we going to open it up to tanks and infantry? Are we going to open it up to artillery? I want to get that all down ahead of time, simply because if my opponent is newer to the game or doesn't feel comfortable playing air units, I don't want to force them to take it. But if we agree to play it, then they can make a decision. And I've done this sometimes where we've agreed to air units. I won't take air units, but I will make sure I have a potential counter for it. Or I might not play artillery, but I'm aware of it. So I don't like kind of the blind, you got 8K, buy whatever you want, and I show up with 6 mech busters, and you have absolutely nothing to stop it. Tactically, that would be a great game, but not fun. It's not fun. It's one thing to lose a game when, and I've done this many times, you go for glory, you know you shouldn't do it, but you do it anyway, it doesn't work out. I have no one but me to blame. Tactically, sometimes you make the wrong decision, or maybe you don't see an opportunity on the table. Those things happen, and maybe you get a little salty or whatever, right? Nobody likes to lose. But when you feel like you have zero power in the game or no way to change the outcome, I mean, this is essentially how Warhammer 40K operates with certain armies. When you play that way outside in a Battletech environment, I don't like how it feels. So I want my opponent, I want myself to feel like you can enact and you can act within this area. So air units, if you don't have a way to directly counter them, they're very, very hard to hit. And they're going to tear up your mechs. And you're going to be like, what the heck is the point of having mechs? Just take all air units. Well, air power can potentially dominate as a power on the table. Because two of the interesting rules from this perspective is if you're at a certain elevation, you can enact what's called a strafing attack. And literally with one weapon, the idea is you're moving so fast, you're hitting multiple hexes. It's like controlled artillery. If a bunch of mechs are in line or in a grouping, which sometimes happens because you're hugging terrain and you're trying to get other advantages against the mechs on the table or the elements on the table, you can get lit up pretty hard. Those 5 or 6 mech busters, Mech Buster has an autocannon 20. It is essentially a well-armored, fast autocannon 20 delivering system. Strafing runs with 5 of those are just going to absolutely obliterate you if you've clustered up. And again, sometimes you have to. If you don't have some way to counter that, that could be pretty unfun. Another option is you can control on some, depending on the configuration, the loadout. There's ways to deliver bombs, which are kind of controlled artillery. That can be extremely deadly. I've done it, and there's been times where it's like, I want to get more tanks on the table, more mechs. I'm not going to take some air support. I'll take my chances. My opponent shows up with some bomb configurations. They're dropping them, and it's just like, wow, that is crazy. So being aware that there's more bookkeeping, and it changes some of the elements of the game. So I don't want to push it from that perspective to dissuade you from playing air support, but I recommend it in terms of a Battletech approach. That's one of the last things that I would approach as a new player. Because if you have a good core group of mechs, various mechs, and some are dedicated anti-air, then that's a focus. If you've added some tanks, if you've added some infantry, and you've added some artillery, you have a well-rounded list that now when you add air, you have some counters, but also you're familiar with slowly adding on additional rule elements of the game. And I don't say that as a way to intimidate you, because again, even the air units, you take control of them, they'll feel pretty familiar with flying fast, flying slow, aka different speeds, the internal, external, the weapon configurations. It's kind of like a mech with wings. It's very easy to figure out. But it's these little nuances that not only make it interesting, but add some other elements. So that's going to frame it for the new players. Then we're going to follow up the next couple of vlogs exploring a little bit more in depth the core rule aspects. Again, not to memorize them, but to give you some pointers where to look. And then we're going to jump into some of my favorite air units as we continue this Battletech journey.